The crowd had gathered in respectful silence. The white marble of Arlington reflected the afternoon sun, and every pair of eyes watched the lone guard march his precise 21 steps before turning sharply, heels clicking with machine-like perfection. But then, something shifted. A murmur rippled across the rows of visitors. At first, people thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light, perhaps just the solemn weight of the place making their imagination stir. Yet standing just beyond the chain that marked the sacred boundary, a figure appeared, not loud, not laughing, not even moving like the rest. This figure stood unnervingly still, almost a still pale, with eyes fixed on the guard as if from another time. The resemblance was uncanny. Veterans in the crowd gasped. A woman covered her mouth. One whispered, trembling, "He looks just like..." But the words died before they could finish. Everyone thought the guard would falter, that he would glance away, break discipline, or maybe even step aside in shock. After all, how could anyone stand face to face with what looked like a ghost of the past? But what happened next? No one expected. The guard did not blink. He did not tremble. His weapon rested firm against his shoulder, his jaw set like stone. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, hanging on the edge of silence. The clicking of cameras stopped. Even the birds seemed to hold their song, and then he took a single, deliberate step forward. The crowd leaned in. Children clutched their parents. A veteran wiped a tear, whispering, "This is not just a ritual, this is a vow." In that frozen instant, the audience realized something profound. This was not just a guard in uniform. This was a man who carried generations of sacrifice on his shoulders. He wasn't simply protecting marble and stone, he was defending memory itself. The crowd thought he would step aside, but instead, the guard showed the world what honor truly means. And what happened after that would shock everyone. Long before that day at Arlington, before the cameras, before the whispers of a ghost, there was simply a soldier, a young man, barely out of his 20s, who had carried more pain than most men twice his age. His name was never shouted on television. He was not a general, nor a politician. He was just one of many who had gone overseas when his country called. The desert sun had burned his skin, the sound of gunfire had rung endlessly in his ears, and the memory of Losso that never left him. He had watched his best friend fall in a roadside ambush, a brother in arms who had laughed with him, dreamed of going home, and never made it back. On the flight home, when the casket was draped in the flag, he had promised silently, "I will not forget you, I will stand for you." That promise, born in the dust of war, became the vow that led him here before the tomb of the unknown soldier. For many, the changing of the guard is a ceremony. For him, it was a sacred duty. Every click of his heel was not just precision, it was remembrance. Every silent step was a prayer for those who never came home. The 21 steps, the rigid posture, the unwavering stillness, it wasn't performance, it was devotion. But Arlington is more than stone and ritual. It is hallowed ground, soaked in sacrifice. Beneath the manicured lawns rest thousands of men and women whose names most will never know. To stand guard here is to stand, for all of them, every hour of every day, in rain, in snow, in the blistering summer heat. There is no room for weakness, no space for ego, only honor. And that is why what happened next struck so deeply, because this place is not meant for theatrics, nor for disrespect. Yet, disrespect was coming. Among the gathered crowd that day was a man who did not share that reverence. His presence was not accidental. He was a well-dressed official, known in political circles for chasing headlines and stirring controversy. Some called him bold, others called him reckless. But all agreed he thrived on attention. He had come to Arlington, not for silence, but for spectacle. As the guard paced, flawless in his march, the man whispered to an aide, smirking. His eyes did not carry sorrow or respect. They carried something colder: skepticism, maybe even disdain. To him, the ceremony looked outdated, unnecessary, a relic from another age. "Look at them," he muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Robots in uniform, pretending silence is strength. What good is any of this?" The veterans in the crowd stiffened. Parents glanced nervously at their children, hoping they hadn't heard. A reporter raised an eyebrow, scribbling notes, sensing a story, but the guard, he heard nothing. His eyes fixed straight ahead, his mind locked in discipline. This contrast the man seeking attention, the guard refusing it, was the seed of the clash to come. To understand why the guard could stand so still in the face of such disrespect, one must understand the weight of his training. Tomb guards are not chosen lightly. They endure months of brutal preparation, memorizing every name, every grave row, every detail of history. They stand in storms when tourists flee for cover. They polish every medal until it gleams. They march at 3 a.m. when no one is watching because the fallen are always watching, and when one finally earns the badge of the guard, it is not worn on the uniform's chest, but on the soul. Few carry it, even fewer can uphold it. So when whispers of mockery touched the air that day, the guard did not react, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. His silence was not weakness, it was discipline. Still, the crowd felt the tension growing. Parents hushed their children. Veterans exchanged sharp glances. Some visitors pulled out phones, recording just in case something happened. They sensed the unease. They sensed the brewing storm. At that moment, Arlington became more than a cemetery. It became a stage. Not for the guard, he never wanted that, but for the world to see the battle between honor and arrogance play out in silence. The man in the suit stepped closer to the boundary chain. His shoes tapped against the stone path, an intrusive echo in a place where even birds seemed to hush their wings. He adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at the cameras, and smirked again. To him, this was a game. A chance to make a point, to show that ritual could be mocked, that silence could be broken. He believed he was untouchable, too powerful for rules, too important for tradition. But what he failed to realize was that Arlington bows to no one. The weight of generations rests here. The eyes of history watch from every headstone, and the guard who stood before him was not simply a soldier. He was the embodiment of every promise made by every warrior who ever swore an oath. The crowd held its breath, sensing the lines about to be crossed, and in the center of it all, the guard stood tall, silent, unwavering, waiting, because when the moment came, it would not be anger that answered disrespect. It would be discipline. The guard marched his 21 steps with the same flawless rhythm he had practiced thousands of times. Heel down, toes together, rifle firm. Every motion was deliberate, rehearsed, perfect. The sun caught the polished steel of his weapon, glinting like lightning with each turn. To most of the crowd, it was mesmerizing, an act of living devotion. But to one man, it was nothing more than an opportunity. The official in the dark suit folded his arms, tilting his head with a smirk. His voice broke the silence, casual at first, as though he were merely making a joke to lighten the mood. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for the first rows to hear. "Toy soldiers, playing dress-up with rifles. Do they really think this matters?" Several veterans stiffened immediately. A man in a faded Marine Corps cap shot him a glare, while an older woman clutched a folded flag to her chest and whispered a prayer. Children leaned closer to their parents, sensing something was wrong. But the guard, he remained locked in his watch. His eyes never shifted, his face never cracked. The silence around him thickened, sharper than any reply. The man chuckled at the lack of reaction. He liked this. He liked that he was being noticed, that whispers in the crowd were turning toward him. He raised his voice. "Do you know what this is? Wasted money, wasted time. Men standing around pretending to protect an empty stone." A sharp hiss escaped from a veteran nearby. "Show some respect," he muttered under his breath. The official ignored him. He stepped closer, heels clacking against the marble as if daring the guard to notice. He spread his arms dramatically, speaking now to the entire crowd. "You people clap for this. You record this. You bring your kids to see what a man walking back and forth in silence. This is not honor. This is not honor. This is theater, and you're the audience." Gasps rippled. A teenage boy lowered his camera, looking ashamed to even be holding it. An old soldier wiped at his eyes, his hands trembling. The guard turned on his axis with mechanical grace, heels striking the stone. 21 steps back, rifle shift. He did not blink. He did not break. His body was a wall, an answer in silence that no words could match. But the official wasn't finished. He thrived on reaction, on outrage. He wanted to provoke. He took another step closer, brushing against the chain that separated the sacred space from the visitors. "Tell me, soldier," he sneered, though the guard never spoke a word. "If you're so brave, why don't you speak? Afraid your words won't match your little dance? Or is silence the only thing you've got?" Cameras clicked, phones recorded. The moment was no longer just for those present, it was being captured. For the world. The veterans in the crowd began to mutter angrily. One stepped forward, fists clenched, but another held him back. "Don't," he warned. "This isn't our fight. It's his." He nodded toward the guard. And indeed, the guard remained. His jaw was carved from stone, his gaze fixed like steel. Sweat traced down his temple, but his posture never wavered. The official chuckled, pretending to salute mockingly. "Yes, sir. Standing tall, sir. Marching in silence, sir. Elmi." What does that earn you? Respect. You think silence will protect this country? A child in the front row tugged on her mother's sleeve, whispering nervously, "Why is he being mean to the soldier?" The mother bent down, shushing her tears brimming in her eyes. The guard pivoted again. Rifle shift, step, step, step. Each one echoed like a heartbeat against the rising noise of the crowd. The official tapped the chain with his polished shoe, testing the boundary. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "You know what? I see a prisoner of tradition, a man afraid to break his script. Look at him, everyone. He can't even move unless they tell him. He's not strong, he's controlled." The tension was unbearable now. The silence of the guard had become louder than any shout. But the man's jeers pressed harder, trying to shatter it. One veteran finally called out, his voice shaking with rage. "Enough." The crowd stirred, phones rose higher. Everyone could sense that something was about to break. The guard turned once more, his steps landing with perfect precision. He reached the end of his line, pivoted, and raised his rifle in that sharp, practiced movement. His face was a mask of discipline. He would not yield, he would not answer, and yet, in that unyielding silence, he was answering louder than words ever could. The official's smirk faltered for the first time. He expected shouting, confrontation, chaos. Instead, he was met with stillness. A discipline so unshakable that it reflected his own disrespect back at him. But arrogance is stubborn. He forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "See, nothing. He does nothing. That's all they are, nothing." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms like a performer awaiting applause. But instead of clapping, he was met with glares, with tears, with silence. The people weren't moved by his words, they were moved by the guard, who refused to flinch. That silence was heavier than any insult. The official gritted his teeth. He wasn't done. He couldn't let the moment slip away, so he stepped even closer, his polished shoe now inches from the chain. His voice dropped low, dripping with venom. "Let's see if your silence holds when I really test it." Gasps erupted. Parents pulled children back. Veterans shook their heads grimly. They knew what this meant. The line was about to be crossed. Yet, through it all, the guard stood unmoving, unblinking, as if carved from the very stone he defended. The storm was gathering. The silence was seconds away from shattering, and the world was watching. The chain was all that separated sacred ground from the restless world beyond. For decades, millions had respected it. For decades, not a single guard had needed to speak more than a single warning to hold the line. But that day was different. The official's shoe tapped against the marble, brushing the chain. The crowd gasped as if lightning had cracked across the sky. He smirked at the reaction, as though proud of the tension he had created. Then, with calculated arrogance, he lifted the chain with 2 fingers and stepped across. It was just one step, one careless, arrogant step. But in that step, he had trespassed on more than marble. He had walked into the memory of thousands who lay beneath the ground. He had spit upon the vow that every guard carried in silence. The guard's eyes locked on him instantly. For the first time that day, something changed. It wasn't a twitch, not even a blink, just a shift in weight, a tightening of grip on the rifle, a spark in the air so sharp the entire crowd felt it. The official straightened his suit jacket, pretending to adjust his tie, and sneered. "Now what? Still going to stay silent? Still going to play statue while I walk wherever I please?" He took another step. The sound of his leather sole echoed through Arlington, louder than gunfire. In that moment, the guard moved. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't violence, it was precision. In a single motion, his rifle snapped from his shoulder into the classic port arms position. The steel bayonet gleamed in the sun, a sudden flash of cold authority. His heels struck together, posture iron straight, eyes locked forward, and then his voice thundered. "Halt!" The word slammed into the air like a cannon blast. It wasn't a shout born of anger, it was command, authority, discipline woven into one devastating syllable. The crowd gasped. Children jumped. A woman covered her mouth. Veterans stood taller, their eyes wide, as though transported back to a battlefield where such voices once commanded men to stand or die. The official froze mid-step, his smirk faltering. He hadn't expected sound. He hadn't expected power. Guard's voice cut through again, steady and sharp as a blade. "You are standing on sacred ground. Remove yourself immediately." The crowd erupted in whispers, phones trembling in hands as they recorded every second. The silence that had hung for so long was now filled with a voice that carried generations of authority. The official tried to recover his swagger. He chuckled nervously, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Oh, come on, it's just a stone." "You're really going to?" The guard's rifle shifted with terrifying precision. bayonet angled not toward the man, but across his path, a silent barrier of steel. The movement was flawless, drilled 1,000 times, but here it was alive, vibrating with unshakable purpose. The guard did not need to shout again. His stance alone spoke volumes. His eyes were not eyes, they were fire, reflecting centuries of sacrifice. The official's laugh died in his throat. His face twitched with the realization that this was not theater, this was not performance, this was a vow, living and breathing before him. The crowd held its breath, some were shaking. One child whispered, voice trembling, "He's like a statue, but alive." A veteran, tears brimming, whispered hoarsely, "That's discipline. That's what they'll never understand." The official swallowed, trying to steady himself. Cameras captured the sweat forming at his temple, the awkward half-smile faltering on his lips. He glanced at the crowd, but there was no support, there only cold stares, some furious, some awestruck, all united in silence. The guard did not flinch. "You will step back." It was not a request. It was not even a threat. It was law spoken in human form. For several long seconds, the world seemed frozen. The guard stood like an unmovable mountain, bayonet gleaming. The official shifted on his feet, torn between arrogance and fear. His breath grew shallow, his face flushed red. And then, slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back over the chain. The moment his shoe touched the public side again, a ripple of relief moved through the crowd. Gasps turned into muffled sobs. Hands clutched flags tighter. Veterans saluted without thinking. But the guard was not done. He raised his rifle back to his shoulder in one flawless motion, heels striking the marble like a hammer. His voice rang out one last time, deep and commanding. "This ground is guarded, by silence, by sacrifice, by honor, do not forget it." The words pierced the air, and then silence returned. The guard resumed his watch. 21 steps, pivot, steps back, the precision unchanged, as though nothing had happened. But for the crowd, everything had changed. People wiped tears from their faces. Veterans stood straighter, some saluting, others whispering prayers. Children clung to parents, wide-eyed with. Reporters frantically scribbled, cameras capturing every second of the moment that would soon spread across the globe, and the official, his smirk was gone. His arrogance had withered under the weight of silence turned into steel. He adjusted his tie again, but his hands trembled. His attempt at a mocking laugh was hollow, drowned by the silence that now mocked him in return. He had crossed the line. The guard had answered, and the world had seen the difference between arrogance and honor, between noise and silence, between chaos and discipline. For years to come, people would argue about what they saw that day. Some would swear the guard never blinked, never breathed, not once during the entire standoff. Others would insist the air itself felt charged, like the ghosts of the fallen were standing shoulder to shoulder with him. But no one would forget, because in that moment, silence was louder than any shout. Discipline was stronger than any man's arrogance. The official stood rigid on the visitor's side of the chain now, his polished shoes planted in defeat. His face burned red under the afternoon sun, but the sweat on his forehead had nothing to do with the heat. His arrogance, once so loud, now looked small, brittle, shattered by a single voice of authority and the silent weight behind it. The crowd was silent, stunned. For long moments, no one dared move. Then, a ripple of sound returned, not chaos, not noise, but whispers. "Did you see that? He didn't even flinch. That's what honor looks like." Phones trembled in hands, cameras zoomed in. On the guard, still locked in his eternal pattern of 21 steps, as though the confrontation had never occurred. His boots clicked sharp against the marble, rifle steady, movements flawless. He did not look at the man. He did not look at the crowd. He simply did his duty, and that more than anything was what crushed the official. For men like him, attention was oxygen. He lived for applause, for headlines, for reactions. But here, after all his taunts, he was invisible. The guard had turned him into nothing. The official tried to salvage dignity. He straightened his tie, brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve, and forced a laugh. "All right, folks, enough excitement. Just proving a point." His voice cracked slightly, but the crowd didn't laugh. Not one. Instead, a veteran stepped forward from the front row. His back was bent, his hair white, but his voice carried strength. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in salute directed not at the official, but at the guard. Others followed. A young Marine snapped to attention. A Navy widow lifted her trembling hand to her brow. Parents nudged their children, whispering, "Salute him, he's earned it." The official's smirk faltered. He was surrounded, not by applause, but by reverence for the very man he had tried to mock. Then came the sound of boots, measured, purposeful. 2 uniformed military police approached from the edge of the crowd, summoned quietly by whispers of what had happened. Their presence was calm, controlled, but undeniable. One of them addressed the official firmly. "Sir, step aside." The man bristled, defensive. "What? I haven't done anything wrong. It was a joke, just a joke." But the officer's face was stone. "Sir, you crossed the chain. You disrespected a guarded post. That's not a joke." The crowd murmured in agreement. Phones captured every second. The official sputtered, looking for allies, but found none. The people who had once eyed him with curiosity now turned away in disgust. Parents shielded their children from his presence. Veterans shook their heads. He was alone. As the MPs guided him gently but firmly away from the sacred boundary, the humiliation became complete. Cameras followed his every awkward step. By the time he vanished beyond the rows of visitors, his name, once a tool for power, had become a stain. But the guard never moved. He did not gloat. He did not glance after the man. His boots struck marble with the same flawless rhythm. Step, 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 pivot, rifle, shift, step again. His discipline was unbroken, his silence unshaken. That contrast was the true punishment. The man had tried to make the guard break character, to force chaos into silence. Instead, it was he who broke, humiliated, exposed, forgotten. Crowd's focus turned fully back to the guard. Phones lowered slowly, as if it felt wrong to keep recording. People stood taller. Hats were removed. A hush spread, not of tension, but of reverence. Somewhere in the back, a child's voice whispered, "He's a hero." The words carried, soft but piercing, and dozens of heads nodded silently. At that moment, the guard was no longer just one man in uniform. He was every soldier who had ever stood the watch. He was the embodiment of sacrifice, of discipline, of tradition that could not be mocked away. And then another sound. A single, sharp click as the guard's heel struck marble on his next pivot. It echoed like thunder in the silence, the exclamation mark on a moment already etched into history. Reporters would later say that this was the exact second the story went viral. Clips would flood social media, the shove, the rifle snap, the voice booming halt, the silent march afterward. But what the cameras could never capture fully was the feeling in the ear, that heavy, reverent awe that no words could match, that it was not the humiliation of one man that made the moment unforgettable. It was the unshakable stillness of another. Official faded from sight, escorted away. The crowd lingered, unwilling to leave, as though breaking the silence now would dishonor what they had just witnessed. And still, the guard marched. 21 steps, pivot, 21 steps back, like nothing had happened, like everything had happened. The climax had passed, but the story was far from over, because in the wake of chaos, silence had spoken louder than the world had ever heard. The official was gone. The echo of his arrogant voice had vanished, carried away like dust in the wind. What remained was silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but sacred. The crowd lingered in that silence. No one rushed, leave. Parents held their children tighter. Veterans stood a little straighter. And the guard, he simply continued 21 steps. Pivot, rifle shift, 21 steps back, as though nothing had changed. But for everyone watching, everything had changed. A colonel, silver-haired and decorated, stepped forward from the crowd. His posture was stiff, but his eyes glistened with something unspoken. Slowly he raised his hand in a salute. The gesture was not loud, not theatrical, it was reverent. Others followed. A Marine veteran in a wheelchair raised his trembling hand. A widow pressed her folded flag against her heart. Children, not fully understanding, mimicked their parents. Row by row, the crowd transformed into a silent sea of salutes, all directed toward the lone guard who carried centuries of honor on his shoulders. The guard never acknowledged them. His vow was not to the living, but to the fallen. Yet, somehow, his stillness became the perfect reply. A boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, eyes wide with awe. "Is he a hero?" The father knelt, his voice breaking. "Yes, son. He is, not because he fought back with anger, but because he didn't need to. That's strength." The words rippled through the air, though spoken softly, and heads nodded in silent agreement. One visitor, an elderly woman with silver hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, whispered through her tears, "My brother is buried here, and for the first time in years, I feel like he's not forgotten." Those words lingered, wrapping themselves around the crowd like a gentle embrace. The guard, of course, did not hear them. Or perhaps he did somehow. in a way beyond words. Inside, beneath the mask of discipline, he carried his own secret. Tucked within the inner pocket of his immaculate uniform was a dog tag old, worn, its edges smoothed by years of touch. It belonged to the friend he had lost overseas, the friend who had never come home. Every time his heel struck marble, every time his rifle gleamed in the sun, he felt the weight of that tag against his chest, and in his heart he whispered the same promise he had made long ago. I will not forget you. I will stand for you. That was why no insult could break him. That was why no arrogance could move him. His strength came not from anger, but from memory. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, people wiped their eyes, whispering to one another, "We'll never forget this. That soldier, he showed us all." I've never felt silence this powerful. The story was already escaping Arlington, carried by cameras and phones, destined to circle the globe. But for those who were there, no video could capture what they felt. It wasn't just an event. It was a reminder that honor still lives. That tradition is not weakness. That silence can be the loudest voice of all. The guard reached the end of his line once more. Pivot, rifle shift. His face betrayed nothing, but deep within he allowed himself a single fleeting thought. His fallen brother in arms, if only he could have seen this day. The guard imagined him there, standing shoulder to shoulder as they once had. He could almost hear the laugh, the easy grin, the voice saying, "You kept your promise, you didn't break." A warmth filled his chest, just enough to ease the cold discipline of his duty. Then, as quickly as the thought came, he locked it away again. The vow demanded focus. The watch was not about him. It was about all of them, the nameless, the forgotten. The heroes who would never walk 21 steps again. The colonel who had saluted earlier turned to the reporters clustered nearby. His voice was low, but his words carried conviction. "Right, what you want," he said. "But don't forget this. That soldier didn't move for power. He didn't speak for politics. He stood because that's what he swore to do. That's what honor means." The reporters scribbled furiously, but even they knew that no headline could capture it fully. Back at the front, the child who had asked if the guard was a hero whispered one last time. His voice was barely audible, but those closest heard it. "He's stronger than the man who shouted. He's stronger than all of us." And in that moment, even the skeptics knew the child was right, because the true strength of a guard is not in his weapon, not in his uniform, not even in his voice. It is in his silence. And that silence, on that day, had spoken louder than anything the world could have imagined. The official's name would soon fade into obscurity, remembered only as the man who tried to break the silence and failed, but the guard's silence that would echo for years, and long after the crowd had gone, long after the sun had set and the night watch had begun, the guard continued his duty. Step, 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 pivot, step again. The watch never ends. There are moments in history when a man does not need to raise his voice, lift his weapon, or even speak a single word to change the world around him. This was one of those moments at Arlington. Beneath the white stone and eternal flame, the guard's stillness became something greater than duty. It became a reminder that tradition is not weakness, that silence is not surrender, that in a world obsessed with noise and power, the truest strength often comes in the form of calm, unshakable resolve. The official who tried to provoke him will be forgotten. His arrogance will be buried under the weight of his own disrespect. But the guard, his silence will live on, because what people saw that day was not just a soldier in uniform. They saw honor embodied. Think of the veterans who wiped their tears, the colonel who saluted in reverence, the widow who whispered that her brother was not forgotten, the child who called him a hero. These voices did not arise because of anger or revenge, they rose because of respect, and that is the power of discipline and the guard's silence. The crowd heard the echoes of every fallen soldier's promise. They heard the heartbeat of generations who gave everything so that others could live free. They heard the truth that duty is not about self, but about sacrifice. And when the guard turned, pivoted, and marched again, he wasn't just continuing a ritual, he was carrying the weight of centuries, step by step, vow by vow. The world will remember this not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, not because it was dramatic, but because it was dignified. And maybe that's what we all need to remember today, that strength is not proven by who shouts the loudest, that honor is not measured by medals or speeches, that respect is not demanded, but earned in silence. When the guard stood his ground without a word, he taught us all a lesson. True power is stillness. So the next time you feel small in a noisy world, remember him, the man who did not flinch, the man who did not answer anger with anger, the man who guarded not just stone, but memory. because as long as there are men like him, the fallen will never be forgotten. And so, the watch continues. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the weight of sacrifice and the meaning of honor, then share it. Let others hear it. Keep the silence alive. Because sometimes, silence speaks louder than anything else.